One day, while walking in the busy streets of Boston, Tessa Bennett, a young woman, saw a beggar sitting on the corner. His name was Leonard O'Connor. He looked sad and worn out, and as people passed by, he held out his hand, asking for money. Tessa, feeling a mix of kindness and hesitation, decided to give him $1. She didn't think much of it at the time, but that small act would change her life forever. What she didn't know was that Leonard wasn't just a random beggar. Leonard had a dark and twisted history, one that connected directly to her family. Tessa had no idea that this encounter would be the first step in a journey that would lead to betrayal and revenge. The truth about Leonard's past would soon unfold, and it wasn't just about a man down on his luck asking for change. It was about a man who had been wronged by Tessa's father, Jacob Bennett, many years ago. That night, as Tessa went home, she had no idea that Leonard was just getting started with his plan. The feelings of guilt she had for giving him $1 would soon turn to fear and confusion. She had unknowingly become part of something much bigger, a story of revenge that had been brewing for years. And as time went on, the connection between Tessa and Leonard would grow, leading her into a fight for her family's future. Stay with me as I continue to share more about how this encounter changes everything for Tessa. Tessa's family, especially her father, Jacob Bennett, had always been successful. Jacob was a businessman who ran a prominent company in Boston, and he had built his wealth from the ground up. But as Tessa began digging deeper into the strange events happening at her company, she learned something disturbing from her father's old friend, Corey Mallory. Many years ago, when Jacob was just starting out, he had crossed paths with Leonard O'Connor, who was an inventor. Leonard had come up with a brilliant idea for a product that Jacob saw potential in. However, instead of helping Leonard, Jacob had betrayed him. He took Leonard's idea and presented it as his own. Jacob sold it to investors, making millions while Leonard was left with nothing. The betrayal shattered Leonard's life. He lost not just his idea, but his career, his family, and his self-respect. Jacob's rise to success had come at the cost of Leonard's downfall. Leonard had never forgotten what happened, and that betrayal had been building inside him for years. Leonard's life spiraled downward, but his anger festered, turning into a thirst for revenge. When Tessa found out the truth, she felt sick. The man she had given money to on the street wasn't just a beggar. He was the person her father had destroyed in order to build his own empire. Leonard had been plotting his revenge for all these years, and Tessa had unknowingly become a part of that plan. Leonard had not just planned to hurt her father, but to ruin everything Jacob had worked for. Tessa's life began to unravel as strange things started happening at her father's company. The financial losses piled up, and rumors about the company's future spread quickly. Tessa couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She worked hard to keep things running smoothly, but every day felt like it was slipping further out of her control. She tried to remain positive, but deep down, she knew that something much bigger was at play. Then one day, Tessa found out that her father's company was being accused of illegal practices. Her father, Jacob Bennett, was under investigation for financial fraud. Tessa was in shock. How could this happen? How could her family's good name be dragged through the mud like this? As Tessa began to investigate, she uncovered something chilling. The accusations weren't just random. There was a pattern to the chaos, and Tessa realized it all pointed back to Leonard O'Connor, the beggar she had met on the street. Leonard had somehow orchestrated the events leading to her father's downfall. He was behind the rumors, the financial losses, and now, the criminal charges. It became clear to Tessa that Leonard wasn't just some poor man asking for spare change. He was a man seeking revenge, and he had been planning this for years. Tessa's father's past betrayal was coming back to haunt them, and Leonard had set his sights on destroying everything Jacob had worked so hard to build. Tessa was now at the center of this twisted game of revenge, and she needed to figure out how to stop it before her family lost everything. As Tessa dug deeper into her father's past, she learned a shocking truth about the betrayal. Leonard O'Connor hadn't just been a casual victim of Jacob's actions. He had been the mastermind behind a groundbreaking invention that Jacob had stolen. Jacob had not only taken Leonard's idea, but also used his connections to crush Leonard's career and reputation. Leonard was once a promising inventor, but after the theft, his life spiraled out of control. Tessa could hardly believe what she was learning. The man her father had once worked with, someone who had trusted Jacob, had been destroyed by the betrayal. Leonard had lost everything, his career, his family, and his dignity. And all because Jacob had chosen greed over honor. Tessa reached out to an old friend of her father's, Corey Mallory, who had been there during those years. Corey was the one who confirmed everything. He explained that Leonard had been crushed by the theft and had spent the years following the betrayal plotting revenge. Leonard's fall had been deliberate, and Jacob had never shown any remorse. Leonard's revenge wasn't something sudden. It had been years in the making. With this new knowledge, Tessa felt torn. She had always admired her father and believed in his integrity, but now she was seeing him in a different light. She couldn't ignore the fact that his success had come at someone else's expense. Leonard had become a shadow in their lives, and his revenge was far from over. Tessa realized that she was now caught in the web of his plans, and her father's past mistakes were coming back to haunt her family. Tessa began to understand the full extent of Leonard's revenge. She was horrified by how deep his plan had gone. Leonard was no longer the man she had once met on the street begging for money. He had rebuilt himself from the ground up, using the bitterness of his past betrayal to fuel his success. Leonard had not just been hiding in the shadows. He was actively taking down everything her family had built. Leonard had spent years carefully plotting the downfall of Jacob Bennett and the entire Bennett family empire. Using his knowledge of the business world and the financial industry, Leonard had started his own company, one that was growing rapidly. And now, he was targeting Jacob's company. Leonard used aggressive stock market tactics, hostile takeovers, and clever manipulation of business partners to tear apart everything Jacob had worked for. Tessa watched the company she had worked so hard for start to collapse. She realized Leonard's plan was far more sophisticated than she could have imagined. He wasn't just after money. He was after complete destruction. Every strategic move Leonard made pushed her father further into financial ruin. It was clear that Leonard had become a master at turning the tables. Tessa was torn between her loyalty to her father and the realization that the revenge Leonard sought was the result of a deep and painful betrayal. Leonard's rise from nothing to a powerful businessman was a direct challenge to everything her father had achieved. Now, Tessa had to decide. Could she fight back, or would she watch her family's empire fall apart? Tessa couldn't just stand by and watch as her father's legacy was destroyed. She knew she had to act. Her father, Jacob Bennett, had always been a strong, self-assured businessman, but now he was lost in the scandal. The accusations of financial fraud were gaining traction, and the media was having a field day. Tessa began to suspect that Leonard O'Connor was behind it all, but she couldn't prove it yet. Leonard had set everything in motion with his clever manipulation, and now her family's future was at risk. The more Tessa investigated, the more she realized that Leonard's attacks were not random. They were calculated, and they were personal. Leonard had orchestrated everything to make it look like her father had been involved in illegal activities, even though Jacob had nothing to do with the crimes he was being accused of. Leonard had managed to frame him perfectly, and now Jacob was under police investigation. Tessa had to fight back, but she didn't know how. Leonard was always one step ahead, using his connections and his newfound wealth to cover his tracks. Tessa felt the weight of her father's mistakes on her shoulders. She realized that the only way to save her father's reputation was to expose Leonard for who he really was. But doing so meant getting caught up in a dangerous game, one where her every move could be watched. As Tessa tried to gather evidence, Leonard began to taunt her. He left cryptic messages, warning her that the revenge was far from over. Leonard's power was growing, and Tessa was running out of time. Her determination to protect her family pushed her into a dangerous corner, and she knew that the final confrontation was inevitable. Tessa knew that in order to stop Leonard and save her family, she had to outsmart him. With her father's reputation on the line, she began planning her counterattack. She started by going undercover, using her skills and knowledge of the business world to infiltrate Leonard's company. She took on a low-level position, quietly gathering information about Leonard's operations and trying to understand how he had been so successful at manipulating everyone around him. The deeper Tessa dug, the more she realized just how deeply Leonard had embedded himself into the financial world. He had been playing people for years, using deceit, false promises, and blackmail to climb the corporate ladder. Tessa knew she had to be careful, but her anger and determination pushed her to take risks. She began to gather evidence of Leonard's past schemes, uncovering his dealings with other companies and exposing his darkest secrets. As Tessa continued to work behind the scenes, she knew that time was running out. Leonard's power was growing, and he was becoming more ruthless. He had already targeted her personal life, manipulating her relationships and creating conflicts that distracted her from her mission. But Tessa wasn't giving up. She was determined to take Leonard down, no matter the cost. Her plan was simple but dangerous. She would use the information she had gathered to destroy Leonard's reputation and business. But Leonard was no fool, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. The game of cat and mouse had begun, and Tessa was prepared to fight fire with fire. Tessa's undercover operation was paying off. She had infiltrated Leonard's company, slowly but surely gaining his trust while gathering vital information. She discovered that Leonard had been involved in multiple fraudulent schemes over the years. His company's rapid rise had not been based on honest business practices, but on lies, manipulation, and even illegal dealings. Tessa knew that if she could expose these secrets, Leonard's entire empire would come crashing down. After months of carefully collecting evidence, Tessa found the key to Leonard's undoing. He had been involved in a financial scandal, one that he had managed to cover up using his wealth and influence. But Tessa had found the paper trail, the emails, and the financial records that could prove Leonard's guilt. It was all there, the final piece of the puzzle. But Tessa knew that revealing this information wouldn't be easy. Leonard was powerful, and he would stop at nothing to protect himself. Tessa had to act quickly. She took the evidence to her father's legal team, hoping they could use it to expose Leonard's wrongdoings in court. The stakes were high. If they failed, not only would Leonard continue to destroy her father's legacy, but her own life would be at risk. With everything on the line, Tessa prepared for the final confrontation. Leonard would soon learn that his reign of manipulation was coming to an end. But Tessa also knew that this battle was more than just about winning. It was about justice. She had spent so much time learning about Leonard's life and his past, and now, it was her turn to make sure his betrayal didn't destroy her family any longer. The day of the final showdown arrived. Tessa, armed with the evidence she had gathered over the past months, walked into the courtroom with a sense of resolve. Leonard had no idea what was coming. He had always been one step ahead of her, manipulating the situation to his advantage. But now, the tables were about to turn. In the courtroom, Tessa and her legal team presented the undeniable evidence. The fraudulent deals, the cover-ups, and the trail of destruction Leonard had caused in his pursuit of revenge. Leonard tried to deny everything, but it was clear that the truth had caught up with him. The case was overwhelming, and Leonard had no way of getting out of it. Tessa's heart raced as she watched Leonard's empire crumble before her eyes. His smug demeanor vanished as the weight of his actions began to sink in. For years, he had used his bitterness and pain to fuel his schemes, but now, all of that was coming back to haunt him. He had become the very thing he had tried to destroy. A broken man who had sacrificed everything for revenge. As the courtroom buzzed with activity, Tessa couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. Leonard's downfall was just, but the emotional toll of everything that had happened, her father's betrayal, Leonard's revenge, and the pain it had caused, was heavy. She had won, but the victory didn't feel as sweet as she had imagined. Tessa had learned that while justice had been served, the cost of revenge was far too high. In the aftermath of Leonard's downfall, Tessa stood at the ruins of her father's company. While she had managed to expose Leonard and reclaim her family's legacy, the victory felt hollow. The cost of everything that had happened, the lies, the manipulation, the personal toll, was far more than she had expected. Leonard's revenge had not only destroyed Jacob Bennett's company, but also torn apart the lives of everyone involved. Tessa confronted her father, Jacob, about his role in Leonard's fall. The conversation was difficult, filled with both regret and realization. Jacob admitted to the betrayal, but he had never truly understood the impact it had on Leonard's life. Tessa had grown up admiring her father, but now she saw him through a different lens. The business empire he had built was the result of years of ethical compromises, and Leonard's revenge was a reminder of the price that had been paid. The story came full circle as Tessa realized that while her family had won back their name and reputation, the emotional scars would remain. The damage done by Leonard's revenge wasn't just financial. It had left a deep, lasting impact on Tessa and her father. Tessa walked away from the battle changed, with a new understanding of the consequences of betrayal, revenge, and the true cost of success. She would rebuild, but the lessons she learned would stay with her. The pursuit of revenge, no matter how justified, had never brought peace. It had only left pain in its wake. Tessa could only hope that, moving forward, she and her father could find a way to heal and move beyond the shadows of their past.